As many of you know, Carrie and I moved here from Salt Lake City in July. And saying that I lived in Salt Lake, or saying that I lived in Utah, really, raises some eyebrows, more than any other state that I've lived in. And the questions are rarely about the mountains or the desert, which are spectacular, but I often get asked about religion. And sometimes it shows up like a question, like, what's it like to live around all those Mormons? And sometimes it shows up like a statement, as in, that must have been an interesting place to live. Translation, what is it like to live around all those Mormons? And it was an interesting place to live and to work, and honestly, though, I wasn't really impacted by the Mormons that much, mostly because they keep to themselves. You know, they own businesses, and so you interact with them in that way, but I didn't have kids in the school, and there just actually isn't much social mixing between the Mormon and non-Mormon community. Of course, their politics are everywhere at the state level, but at the city level, it's pretty left-leaning in Salt Lake. But living that close to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, which is what they prefer to call themselves, or the LDS Church, did change my opinion of them, like living up close. Prior to moving to Utah, I thought of the LDS Church as a peculiar offshoot of some mainline Christianity with some weird teachings, but as someone who's spent a lot of time in Buddhist communities, I was really quite used to weird teachings. The Buddhists are bizarre. But now that I have been there and I've lived with them, it actually feels more than weird. I now can confidently say that I think that the Mormon Church is a cult. It's a very large cult, which even included a presidential candidate, but it's a cult nevertheless. And some of you may have heard a few things about like the underwear, which they call garments, and the baptisms for the dead, and the secret handshakes, or even the polygamy, which give the church its peculiar flavor of Christianity. But out of context, these things just seem more bizarre, but not really, innocuous, but not really that dangerous. But they're not, right? They are elements of the theology that are designed to control the community by separating the community into tiers of preferential membership. And it uses the coercive power of being part of the in-group to exert influence and extract money. There is a golden ring that is held out in front of the members, and they are constantly striving for it, only for some of them anyway, to achieve it, and then to be told that there is another golden ring, right? They're willing to put in the work. And it's a church culture that is imbued with manipulative teachings about divine callings and entrepreneurship and secrecy and hierarchy. And it should be no surprise that Utah ranks number 1 in the nation for fraud and multi-level marketing schemes. Yeah, it's true. The church itself is a multi-level marketing scheme that uses your eternal soul as collateral in its efforts to enrich and empower an elite class of believers. There are over 400 LDS temples in the world. The one here in D.C., actually, I think is quite beautiful. If you're driving up past the Beltway, as temples go, I kind of like this one. And the temple is the ultimate, right? People in good standing who have a recommend, they can enter the temple to do weddings, go to weddings and to perform baptisms for the dead and for other reasons. But the ultimate goal is to pass through the temple, which is passing through the veil. And part of this is because not everyone can do it. There are a host of restrictions and agreements that you have to make before you receive your temple recommend. Not every Mormon gets to do this. There's quite a bit of work involved. And when you finally get there, when you finally get the permission to go through it, you have no idea what is waiting on the other side. People do not tell you. And so you are signing up for something, you are signing up to say yes to something, and you don't know what's there. Right? You're given a sacred name that nobody else can know. Well, ladies, your husband can know your name, but you can't know his. Just so you know. You get taught the secret handshakes. You're given some secret knowledge. And then you're instructed to never tell anyone under the penalty of eternal banishment. And you bow your head and you say yes. And then you are walked to a large curtain. And from the other side of the curtain, a hand extends through. You are asked your sacred name. You are asked to demonstrate the handshakes and say the coded language. And then the hand pulls you through the veil into the celestial room, which is symbolic of how you will be pulled into what is called the celestial kingdom, the highest level of Mormon heaven by God, if you keep the covenants. Later, you walk out of the temple wearing your garments for the first time, promising never to reveal what you saw or heard. Now, I don't tell you all of this to mock them or to create a voyeur experience for you. Actually, none of this is really secret anymore. There's all sorts of YouTubes that have been made by disenchanted Mormons. There's even people who hooked up little cameras so that they walked you through it. You can see it all online. The church doesn't like that, but it's all there. Of course, the church doesn't call these things a secret. They call it sacred, which is part of the twist. Now, I brought it up this morning to talk about the impact, not the ritual itself. On the highest level, it's an issue of salvation. Mormon heaven has 3 levels to it. Striving and exclusivity are sort of baked into the theology. But there's also a status thing in the community. All right? There's real-world consequences, because if you're a temple-going, garment-wearing Mormon and you're up for a job against somebody who isn't, well, the person doing the hiring, and the person doing the hiring is also Mormon, which happens a lot in Utah, well, you're instantly considered a higher-quality candidate because you're worthy of the endowments. Right? Not everyone can get them. And then finally, there is an us versus them dynamic that's at play. And the us versus them dynamic isn't exclusive to religion, of course. It was viciously employed on the playgrounds of all of our childhoods. But it does have a particular power when religion uses it, when what is at risk is your eternal life. And while we may all remember that person who made us feel rejected on the playground, those wounds don't really go away, but they also are not linked to your soul. So churches that intentionally make exclusivity part of the religion do so because it can become one of the most compelling aspects of belonging. You know beyond a shadow of a doubt that you are among the elect, because the leadership has told you. You are always in danger of losing your place among the elect because also the leadership tells you. But provided you maintain your allegiance to the leadership and pay your tithe, you will remain a member of the us. And this is why our world is full of religious trauma, right? Because this isn't just a Mormon thing. It's the Catholics do it, the evangelicals do it, Orthodox Jews, Muslims, Hindus do it. All high-demand religions intentionally use exclusivity to exert influence and power. And there are other churches that create exclusivity unintentionally. Right? In-groups can appear in communities with the best of intentions. At my very first church in Flushing, Queens, I was surprised to learn that the finance committee met at the committee chair's house in his living room. When I asked, why not meet at the church? It's more transparent, a lot more accessible. They were surprised. Why? They said with like zero subterfuge. It's an open meeting. Anyone can come, they said. They never considered that not everyone knew where Bill lived. Or that newcomers just might be intimidated to ask. Would they feel welcomed? Would they actually be welcomed? Now, it was a small church, so anybody who wanted to do work honestly probably would have been welcomed. Oh, you want the finance committee? Come on. But they lived with this perspective, right? They couldn't see the problem that it was. And it sounds funny, but I think actually a lot of churches have fallen into a similar pattern since COVID. Right? Due to the pandemic, we all had to go online to keep our churches running, and Zoom was a godsend. It helped us meet and keep things together. But COVID is now endemic. Services are back in person, but a lot of meetings, if not most meetings, have still remained online. You know, because if you're one of those people who needs to know where the meeting is, you probably already have the address. Of course we say that everyone's welcome, but are they really? Right? How would they even find it? Sometimes it feels like you have to know the secret handshake to get the link. It's not welcoming at all. Even if it makes the lives of the people who are part of the in-group easier. And, you know, at that same church, the one in Queens, I had to beg the greeters to actually welcome people at the door. It was kind of a tiny group of older folks, and they often use that time to catch up with one another. And I would be like, hey, come on, let's stand by the door. But we didn't get a lot of visitors, you know, so it's not like they had to have a sophisticated system. But actually, I think there was more at play, right? I think the greeters didn't really know what they were doing. I think they didn't know that they were contributing to something larger, right? Which is understandable. You know, what's larger than saying, welcome, maybe helping a person get a name tag, point them in the direction of the sanctuary or maybe the bathroom. You know, that's what's important, right? It's what being a greeter means. It's about getting you information. Or is it? Or is it? You know, there's a line I've always liked that goes, people don't remember what you said. They don't remember what you said. They remember how you made them feel. They remember how you made them feel. And I think there is a difference between giving information or getting it, like getting information, and being welcomed. It's a different feeling. And I'm not trying to pick on those greeters. They honestly were great people. It's just that the greeters functioned the way that whole church functioned, right? It was the culture of that church. The board, the chair, the RE, social justice, property, finance. They all ran in the same way because they all grew out of the same culture. The church's culture determined the culture of every team and committee there. So it wasn't just the greeters. There was something that was, you know, they didn't know they were contributing to something larger because the church didn't know it was contributing to something larger. And the finance committee wasn't trying to be exclusive. It's that the whole church was kind of exclusive, right? The church didn't know. And they would have said the opposite. They would have said it over and over again. Like, we are a welcoming congregation. We want to be a welcoming congregation. And they said they wanted to grow, and they said they wanted young families, and they said all the things that you're supposed to say. And the only reason I'm telling you this is because we did grow a little bit. You know, when I was first hired, there were 65 people, and when I left 6 years later, there were 85, which not that much growth. 30% on one level, percentage-wise, but, not that much growth. But there were more families. There was a younger crowd. There was even this hip young NPR podcaster who was driving up from Williamsburg every week with her friend. But the culture never really changed. So when I left in 2012 to start a church, they had $1 million in the bank and a great stock market run ahead of them. But they closed last year because they never figured out how to belong to the larger thing. They never figured out how to not be exclusive. And I don't think they ran out of money. I think they ran out of people. There are 972 Unitarian Universalist churches in the United States, which is a shrinking number. Every year that number shrinks. Every year there are fewer UU churches in America. Now, of that number, of the 972, 29 are larger than 500 people. 29 out of almost 1,000. 96 are larger than 300, so less than 10% are larger than 300. The median is actually right around 100 people, 100 members. About half are above that, half below that. And there's a reason for this. And it's not our theology, which I think is great. I actually think it's amazing. It's not our politics, which I also think are amazing. It's not our demographics. It's our culture. Nationally, it's our culture. And despite what we say, despite what we think we want, our culture is exclusive. And I've talked about this next example many times, but it shows up in our marketing materials. Like some of you have been around long enough to remember the campaign that said, "Are you and don't know it?" Right? Which implies that Unitarian Universalism is about a type of person rather than a faith that can transform your life. It implies an in-group. If you are good enough, you're going to find us. If you want it bad enough, if you hang out at coffee hour long enough to figure out how to find a way to break in. The reason over 90% of UU churches are smaller than 300 people is because the highest value is community. The highest value is community. There's a thing called the Dunbar number. Has anybody heard of the Dunbar number? Steve has heard of the Dunbar number. Instead of putting you on the spot, in the 1990s, there was a British anthropologist named Robin Dunbar who found a correlation between primate brain size and the average size of a group that they belong to. So using the average human brain size, he then extrapolated from the result of primates, we also primates, right? He proposed that humans can comfortably maintain 150 stable relationships. And he explained the principle informally as the number of people you would not feel embarrassed about joining uninvited for a drink if you happen to bump into them at the bar. So we have a threshold of in the range of about 150 people that we really can kind of know and feel comfortable with. In actuality, this number lies somewhere between 100 and 250 people, depending on customs and rules of the group, but commonly they say the Dunbar number is 150. The reason that 90% of UU churches are smaller than 300 people is because it's the limit of the Dunbar number. Because the value is community, right? In the church world, we call it the plateau. Like churches plateau at 300 is what we say, regardless of denomination. Churches struggle to break through this number because the cultural value of community doesn't allow it. And people do not believe that they can have community when the number goes past that number. Like, I don't know everybody anymore. Right? And it's not a conscious thing, it's just intuitive, right? That's the number that feels comfortable for the size of our primate brains. So when a congregation starts to grow, new values are introduced that unconsciously threaten the exclusivity, and people engage in behaviors that sabotage the growth so that the number always stays below 300. They don't know that they're doing that, right? They're not intentional, but it's almost this unconscious thing that happens to keep people feeling okay because the number one value is community. They think they're actually protecting the church, which, maybe. It's not disingenuous. It's not malicious behavior. It's just what we do as primates who want to belong to a community. Now, the reason my first church closed, the church in Flushing, is because their highest value was community. And the reason they closed, and it sounds crazy, like who doesn't want community in a lonely world, isn't the solution to the loneliness community. No, it's not. It's not that. Having a community as the highest value ultimately always transforms into some version of exclusivity. Because you either fit in or you don't based on the culture, not based on what is being offered as a higher value. And so you will either learn the secret handshakes and find your place among the crowd, or you won't. And the people that don't find a home in our congregations probably don't even know why they're bumping against the Dunbar number, right? They say things like, it just didn't feel like the right fit. When in truth is, they were just over the number that congregation felt comfortable with, and it's self-regulated. So for some places, actually, that number is smaller, right? Some places can tolerate closer to 300. This one is presently, I think, at 285. But until a congregation becomes willing to surrender community as its primary value and takes on something greater, it will always stay in that range regardless of what people say in surveys or cottage meetings or whatever else they say that they want. You will unconsciously be bumping against that. Ultimately, people are coming to church not to experience something greater than them. They are coming to church to see the people that I know, right? And in places that's 200 people, some places it's 250, some places it's 150, some places it's 75. That's the culture of it, right? Moving beyond the comfortable number is inviting chaos, and the culture is committed to the status quo, which ultimately is exclusive. So again, this is going to sound strange, but you cannot be committed to community as the primary value and be committed to social justice. Community is about preserving a space of like-minded people. It's about loving ourselves, which is not bad. It's not bad. I'm not saying that churches over 300 are better churches. They are not. Some of them weird. Some of them are super weird. But they have been able to break through the plateau because there is another value that is larger than community for them. At some point, they surrendered community as the motivating value for organizing. And it's fine. Like, the number is not what's at risk. Like, smaller, larger, there's no valuation there. But if a church wants to be about transformation, if it wants to be about social justice, if it wants to be about liberation, then it also has to let go of the value of community. You can still have your friends, you still do that, but it's one or the other. Because one is inwardly focused, and it doesn't matter how many social justice coordinators you have or hire, the community won't transform because it's just hiring out of wanting to have an appearance for the outside world. So the question for any congregation that's in transition or wants to be in transition is, do we love ourselves or do we want to love the hell out of the world? And that's an honest question. There isn't actually a value there. It can be okay to say, no, the first one. But just to have integrity around the answer. Right? This is a function of purpose. What is our purpose? Do you remember Arjuna sitting in the chariot, unwilling to make a decision? Krishna reminding us that not making a decision is still a decision. It's just the worst kind of decision. It's the decision of sabotage. Right? Saying you've got to become willing to give up community sounds funny. It sounds wrong. But what it really means is you're willing to give up being about yourself. You've got to give up what you want, community, and pick up the challenge of trying to get what you need, which is to fulfill a purpose, because there are stakes in this world. You know, the other night, President Biden opened the State of the Union with a challenge. It was one of the best State of the Union speeches. Right? And he opened with, in January 1941, Franklin Roosevelt came to this chamber to speak to the nation. He said, "I address you at this moment unprecedented in the history of the Union. Hitler was on the march. War was raging in Europe. President Roosevelt's purpose was to wake up Congress and alert the American people that this was no ordinary time. Freedom and democracy were under assault in the world." Biden continues, "Tonight, I come to the same chamber to address the nation. Now it's we who face an unprecedented moment in the history of this union. And yes, my purpose tonight is to wake up the Congress and alert the American people that this is no ordinary moment either. Not since President Lincoln and the Civil War have freedom and democracy been under assault at home as they are today. What makes our moment rare is that freedom and democracy are under attack both at home and overseas at the very same time." He continues, "In a literal sense, history is watching. History is watching, just like history watched 3 years ago on January 6th when insurrectionists stormed this very Capitol and placed a dagger to the throat of American democracy." That's some pretty strong language that I don't remember in State of the Unions, and it's because the man was serious. Many of you were here on that darkest of days. We all saw that with our own eyes, the insurrectionists were not patriots. They had come to stop the peaceful transfer of power, to overturn the will of the people. January 6th lies about the 2020 election and the plots to steal the election posed the gravest threat to U.S. democracy since the Civil War. But they failed. America stood strong and democracy prevailed. But we must be honest, the threat to democracy must be defeated. My predecessor and some of you here seek to bury the truth about January 6th, and I will not do that. This is a moment to speak the truth and to bury the lies. Here's the simple truth. You cannot love your country only when you win. Yeah, it was great. It's funny to get applause for somebody else's speech, but it was a great speech, and it was one that we needed because everybody's been like, "Oh, Sleepy Joe," and he was not asleep. He's not. It was great. It was the speech that many of us needed to hear because it was about being about something larger than what we want. It was about something larger than just getting our way, than just being about ourselves, which is what that other stuff was about. It's what so much of America seems to be about today. I want mine, me. No we. So little we. And sometimes the left has just been as bad about this as the language policing has been really wild, right? Do you say the right exact words to get on the inside group? And I say that like words mean things, and that's really important for us to be constantly examining our language and making sure that we're moving in the right direction. But got to tell you, sometimes it feels like you got to know the secret handshake to determine who's in the exclusive club of the righteous. That's the same thing the Mormons do. We have a purpose to fulfill in this world. There are stakes. And, there are always stakes, but right now they're really high. And the hard-to-swallow pill about the reason that Unitarian Universalist churches are closing is that many of them want to be about community, about loving ourselves, about am I getting mine, about preserving space for like-minded people instead of taking up the hard transition of working to fulfill the liberation, the purpose of of living for others. Now, there's a bar that was made famous, right, for being the place where everyone knew your name. And on some level, I get it. We all want that. We all want to come in and be seen and recognized and loved, right? We want to be familiar. But if everyone knows your name, you're in an exclusive club. Because there's a number beyond which you can't know everybody's name. And if knowing everyone's name is our highest value, then we cannot follow through on the charge that we have been given to defend this nation. Not in politics, but like the soul of it. Because exclusivity and social justice do not align. So can we surrender community to become the place where transformation occurs? Amen.